All right, today we're going to demonstrate the layout of a still life. I'll be using a free draw technique. And so ideally what you're going to see with this technique is that I am learning to figure out how to draw things as I see them. I'm not using perfect dimensions. I'm not using a ruler. This is more of what's called gesture drawing. Gesture drawing is where I'm using a lot of movements with my hands and body, and I am quickly getting information on the page. So for a still life, I wanted you to be able to see the still life that layout that I have so that you can understand what it is I'm trying to draw. So my first objective, anytime I have a still life or a drawing, is I want to figure out where everything is on the page. So what's going to have to happen is, I'm going to be drawing on here and trying to show kind of where everything is on the picture plane. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to give me information. I'm going to start with, small things and then large things, and I'm going to figure out where are the short things, where are the medium things, where are the tall things. And I'm going to use them in relation to the edge of my paper. Do I have perfect straight lines? Sure. Are they measured out perfectly? Not for this. This is gesture drawing, and it's more of a sketch. So on here, I'm just going to real quickly kind of start to get some information on the page. And I know that that frame in the background is not going to go all the way to the edge of my paper. So as I'm trying to figure out where everything goes in the picture plane, I'm going to probably erase and make marks and erase those marks and go back and redraw it. There's nothing wrong with that. So now as I'm drawing that first large object, which is that frame in the background, I ran into an object. Well, that object, I'm going to start to kind of mark that in on my paper. That object goes, sorry, you can't see it. The object actually goes to the edge of the paper. So I'm just going to kind of start to draw in relation to where those objects are in the picture plane. That little, I guess you could call it container, is not all that tall, but I'm going to start to just kind of get some placement of objects on here. It is right next to the edge of the picture, and I probably drew it a little bit wider than it should be. I'm going to fix that real quick, and it's okay if your paper is messy. You're just trying to get a little information on there. Is it going to be perfect? Nope, and that's just fine. All right, so next to that, I have another object. So typically when you are drawing with gesture technique, you are going to see that you make a lot of mistakes, or perhaps you do it right that first time. I'm looking at the edge of this container here, and I'm looking at this little saucer cup, and what I'm looking at is how far from the edge of this little container is the edge of my saucer cup. And that is pretty close, so I'm trying to use the relationship of each object to the next one to help me understand how to draw these objects. When you're drawing for the first time and trying to figure out placement, you're going to see that, placement of objects and the shape of them maybe isn't so accurate. Is that okay? You bet it is. No problem. What my objective is with this is to start to decide, how tall is everything? And when I am drawing, I want them to look like they look in the actual still life. So my next object that I ran into is this old milk jug. The milk jug is actually it's like twice the size of this first container that I drew. So that's one way that's going to help me figure out how to draw that. I'm going to make it as if it's like twice the size of that first container that I drew. And what I see is that it comes to right at the edge of that little saucer cup. So I'm going to give myself some guidelines. And you know what? Some artists actually, instead of drawing what the object looks like, they actually make little boxes. So if I wanted to, I can just make myself a little box to show where that little milk jug is. So right here, do I have the actual shape? Nope, but I'm going to start to kind of fill that in a little bit. And then I'm able to kind of use those dimensions to help me with the next object. So in front of that milk jug is this little nest here. Here's what's different about that. I'm showing that, first of all, I have this container here. That container is behind the milk jug. And then next to that is the saucer. Next to the milk jug is the saucer. In front of both is this little nest. Don't busy yourself with trying to draw details. That is not what you do right now. What I'm doing is trying to figure out where exactly that nest is in relationship to these objects. It is the thing that jumps out to me. It's the closest object to me in this little ensemble right here. Later on, I'll get to these smaller pieces, but I want it to appear as if it's closer to me, and that's one thing is I'm making sure that I get the shape. I see that it covers up part of that milk jug, and it actually kind of starts right at the same edge as this little saucer cup. So I'm going to give myself some little guidelines here, and it covers up a little bit of this saucer cup. So I'm going to just draw some lines in there and give you just a little idea of just how big that little nest is. Now, I would say that nest, it looks like it is right about here. This is pretty accurate as far as how tall it is, but how low it goes at the bottom. I want to say I'm going to kind of make it, it looks like a football shape. It's not perfect and round, that's for sure. Later on, I'm going to get to making it look more accurate. But for right now, it looks like the placement in relation to these other objects is pretty accurate. It is in front of the milk jug. It is also kind of in front of the little saucer. It comes down a bit farther than all of those objects. And now I think I have the placement pretty much accurate. Now I'm going to move on to the next object, which is this little chicken here. The chicken is almost as tall as the milk jug. So I'm going to first write exactly where does the top of that chicken go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm making a little mark for the top of that chicken. And the chicken sits inside the nest. And what I'm doing now is just kind of giving some markings of about where the chicken's tail reaches and just where those objects fall in the picture plane. I'll adjust this later on, but like I said, I'm just kind of getting some information down quickly and using quick motions with my hands to get that information on the page. No working on specific details, just information at this stage. Shapes are acceptable, messy lines are acceptable, all of that is just fine. Now I'm ready to move on to this little planter box. I should call it a pot. Let's see. Now, does this pot actually go to the top of that nest? No, I'd say that it looks like it's a little bit taller than the nest. It sits next to the nest and has a little bit of space in between, and it's on an angle. It doesn't look like it's quite as tall as that nest, but I want to say it's shorter than the chicken. So I'm going to give myself a rounded top and an angled bottom here. And I can always go back and adjust it. In fact, I encourage that. Okay, then I have some objects inside of that little pot. So now I'm just going to try to show where those objects are. The lime is a little bit taller than that pot. The lemon is just a little bit taller than the pot. And then you see a little bit of that angle there. Okay, now I'm going to work with these smaller objects down here in the foreground. The foreground are the objects that are closest to you. So if I were to identify those real quick, that's going to be the nest, the apples, the pears, and then in the middle ground, that's where, things are a little bit farther away. That's where I have this little trinket and the milk jug, and then in the background I have a brick wall and I have the frame. So now I'm down here and I'm working with the placement of these small little fruit items. They are in front of that bucket. So I want to make sure that I show they're not, very tall. I'm just going to get some basic information. I started with the apple over here, and now I'm going to make sure that this other apple or cherry, whatever that is, looks like it's sort of in front of these other objects. Well, one of the things that I'm doing to show that it's in front of the other objects is I am making sure that I kind of erase a little bit of that first apple because that is disappearing behind this. It almost looks like a cherry. I'm not sure what it is. And then now I'm looking at my pear. My pear is next to the first apple, but it's set back just a little bit. It actually looks taller on the page. It is going to, definitely have an appearance of it sitting a little bit more towards the back. Next to that pear, I'm kind of gauging how much more of that bucket do I see. And now I'm going to refine that little detail there because it looked like I needed to redraw that just a little bit more. And now I'm feeling pretty happy with what I see, although I can look at my apple here, and what I am seeing is that bucket is actually a little bit more a little bit skinnier than I made it. So I'm going to go back and erase that real quick and draw it as I see it. Do you see what I'm talking about? This tiny little space here. So I'm going to go back and just kind of fix that little angle. And now I'm feeling a little bit happier with that. All right, so now my next job, I've laid out some objects here. My next job is to bring in that frame. The frame is going to come in at an angle, and there's a spot where it actually stops, where it hits the edge of the paper. So I can see that I actually need to cut off part of my paper. It didn't quite go to the edge of the paper, so you kind of need to know that. Sometimes when you're drawing, you run off the page. Sometimes you don't. In this case, I have a little bit too much space over on the edge, so I'm going to trim that later on. All right, so the actual edge of that frame goes to the edge of the paper, and I'm going to try to draw in the bottom of that frame over here. I see it a little bit behind that bucket, and then, of course, I first started drawing it up here, and I see a tiny bit of it down here in between the milk jug and the saucer cup. All right, so now I'm going to go in here. Oops, there's another detail right here that I missed. I'm going to go back in with this real pretty blue glass and bring that in. It is actually behind this first little trinket jar. It doesn't go quite to the edge of the frame, but it's going to give me just a little bit of a peek of that little bottle there. It does have some plants in there, so I'm going to show the height of those plants. Now, they have little balls on the edges of those little plants or stems. So the thing that I want to show first is the stems that I see. They tend to get real close to the frame. And I see one ball is right next to the frame, and then I have one over here that is a little bit in front of the frame, and then one over in the background. So I've given myself a little bit of information just to get it started. Now I'm going to work on completing the actual frame. So the frame itself has a frame and little windows for chalkboard in between there, and then it runs off of the page. this line right here is actually not a perfect straight line. I actually see it a bit on an angle. And just to get that information on the page, I'm just going to lightly sketch that in. And then I'm going to look here at the difference between where the top of the milk jug is and where that other frame starts. So I kind of want to use that to help guide me to understanding how to make this look accurate. And you know what? I just noticed I drew this line in the total wrong place. It actually starts really close to this bucket here. So I'm going to erase that and draw it again. But I think that the placement of this horizontal line is pretty accurate. I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. And now I'm going to bring in this vertical line of this frame. Yeah, I made it a little bit too much of an angle. It goes a little bit behind that line. And now I'm just going to finish drawing that in. Okay, so is it perfect? No. What I have done so far is I've gotten information on the page, whether it's shapes or actual objects that you see. The object of getting a gesture drawing or basic still life layout drawn in proportion has nothing to do with fine details and everything to do with proportion. So right here on my picture plane, I actually have details that I have not drawn in, including these little wrinkles in the fabric, and I also have this little brick wall in the background. I'm going to finish up getting some basic information, and I just want to remind you, the purpose of this is to be able to get information quickly on your paper so that you can begin bringing in all of the fine details. So as I'm drawing, again, I am just trying to move quickly so that I am drawing what I see based on what is in the picture. So again, I'm drawing things in relation to the next object. I'm not blindly drawing what I know in my mind. I'm drawing what I see, which is a big, big thing for people to understand when you are first learning different drawing techniques. So instead of going in and drawing a brick wall as you know it, I want you to be able to see the picture and draw it as you see it. So what I see is simply shapes in relation to objects. So everything that you see is drawn quickly and probably a little bit inaccurately, but the objective is to be able to just quickly get that information on the page. I'm going to go back and redraw. I see on this little area here that I went a little too far over with that brick. I started drawing what was in my mind and not what was in the paper. Okay, that's really going to be the key to understanding how to draw accurately. Okay, so at the bottom here, I have all this empty space. Well, it didn't fit in my picture, didn't actually go all the way to the bottom. So you have to know that when you're drawing, especially when you're doing a free draw, do you actually have to use the entire page? That's the misconception. Lay it out as you see it. And when you see that there's an area that you're not, that you're not actually supposed to be drawing, just kind of block it off. And I have some X's here, so I know I'm going to cut those areas off later on. And now my last job, I'm just going to draw in some of the wrinkles in that fabric just to get me going. I'm not working on shadows or details, but maybe just a couple of placements of different objects. And that completes the demonstration for today.